Hello everyone. Welcome to the new episode of Automationdigest. Today we'll be talking about web elements, which is finding elements in a page. So what is web element and why do we require them? Anything which is present in a web page is called a web element. The web elements can be any of this type. Any element that we find in a web page can be an edit box, link, buttons, images, text areas, checkbox, radio button, or drop down. We have to identify these elements using Selenium so that we can perform actions on these elements. How do we do that? So for Selenium, the root entity is search context. There are two interfaces which extends search context, which are WebDriver and web elements. Search context is also an interface. Search context has two methods, find element and find elements. These are the two methods which will be used to find the web elements. Find element is used to find a singular web element, whereas find elements is used to find multiple web elements in the form of list of web elements. There are 8 locators which will be used inside the find element to identify these web elements. There are 5 new relative locators after Selenium 4. For now, let's focus on those 8 locators. The 8 locators are, we can use any of these 8 locators to identify any elements. How does this locator help us identify the elements? To understand that aspect, let's get into a website. We are in a Google page. What we need to do here is do a right click on the page which we want to automate. Let's do a right click. Once you do a right click, you will find something called inspect. Click on that inspect button. Once you click that, a dev tool opens up. It has the whole detail of the page in HTML tree structure. This HTML tree structure is called DOM, Document Object Model. We would be utilizing this DOM to identify the elements. If you see on the left corner, there is a pointer. Click on that, and whichever element we want to visualize details for, we can just go there and click on it. This search query box is represented by the element highlighted in our DOM. So in any of the HTML tag, you will always see a angle bracket. The angle bracket symbolizes the beginning of the tag. The angle bracket is followed by the text, which is called the tag. Text area for this element is the tag. Everything that follows are attributes. In this case, ID equal to APJFQB is attribute number 1. Class equal to JLFYF is attribute number 2. Similarly, there can be multiple attribute in an element. Whatever is on the left hand side of the equal to is called the attribute name. Whatever is on the right hand side of the equal to, which is always within double quote, is called the attribute value. The first one is a tag. Anything which is on the left hand side of the equal to is an attribute name, and on the right hand side it's the attribute value. If you see, there is a closing tag over here. If there is anything in between this tag, we call it content. We can use any of the combination of tag, attribute name, value, and content to find out the element. So let's take the example of this box here. Whatever we see on the right hand side which says sign in Google, if you observe, it's in a different window altogether, or which resembles like a window. This is called a frame. We'll talk about frames in our later sessions. For now, let's stay focused on the web elements. So in this site, let's say we have to close this pop-up. So we have to click on no thanks. How do we do that? I have clicked on the left corner pointer. Now you go on top and click on the element which you want to identify. Once you have done that, you will be able to see something highlighted in the DOM. Now we will be using this DOM to identify our element. So how do we do it? We talked about those 8 locators. We will be using any of those 8 locators and identifying the element. So today we will perform a flow using all those 8 locators to see what the response is. So for the first one, let's use XPath. XPath has 2 ways of doing it. We can use a relative XPath or an absolute XPath. For absolute XPath, the path starts from the root or HTML. If I am using a relative XPath, it can start from any other place. When it comes to absolute XPath, it has a high maintenance. When it comes to relative XPath, the performance is lower. So first, the easy way. On the element, if you do a right click, you see something called copy. Go into the link, you will find something called XPath. If you click that and paste it here, this is an absolute XPath which starts from HTML and it comes down to button. The problem, as I mentioned about maintenance, in case this div2 is no more valid, then the whole path fails. Whereas for relative XPath, we do not need to give the whole path. We can just start from button. The whole intention of any of the locator is to find unique element. Whenever we are thinking of the relative XPath, we also have to make sure that we use the XPath which is unique. We will be using a relative XPath for now. Another difference is, if you observe at the beginning, for absolute XPath, it starts with a single slash. Whereas for a relative XPath, it starts with a double slash. We can use a combination of tag and other attribute details in XPath. After the tag comes the square bracket. We can give all the information about the attribute that we want to use inside this square bracket. For example, @class equal to, within single quote, we can use the whole name. If I press enter at the end, I will see 1 of 1, which means it is able to identify this element uniquely. Now, this is not the only way of identifying this. We can find out an element by multiple ways. Whenever we are using any of the attribute details, we use a attribute name equal to attribute value. Whereas, whenever we use the content, we use the method called text. And we can use equal to, we'll have the text inside it. We will have the text inside the single quote. Now, because I'm using two, it has to be separated by a logical operator. In this case, let's use AND. We can use any of the logical operator. If I press enter, again, it is a 1 of 1 match. This is a valid XPath which was able to identify no thanks. After identifying elements, we have to perform actions on those elements. We will talk about web actions in detail in future classes. We will talk about two web actions today, click and send keys. Click is used to click on any of the web elements. Send key is used to write something on the web elements. We cannot write on any button, so send key is not applicable on button. We cannot write on any link, so send key is again not applicable on any link. Send key is generally applicable on any of the text area or edit boxes. In this case, we will be using a click because we want to click on no thanks. So let's go to our code. And remember, I was talking about a frame over here. If you right click on this block, you will find something called this frame. This is only visible for a frame. For now, frame is a basic structure which is separate from the whole page. It has its own HTML page in itself. So whenever we encounter frame, we have to switch to the frame and we have to switch back to the default context or the main page. So in the previous sessions, we have already discussed about WebDriver, how to initiate WebDriver and get into any of the website. We will continue from there. So first thing, after getting into the google.com, we have to click on that no thanks button. We identified the element using XPath. So we will use that. First thing, we have to use a command called driver.findElement. Find element is used to find out one single element. We will be using an abstract class called by and static methods called XPath. If you observe, there are all the eight locators that we have talked about listed in the options: XPath, tag name, CSS locator, link text, ID, partial link text, class name, and name. So for now, we will use the XPath. Inside the XPath, we have to give the string values. The value that we want to provide here is, after identifying the elements, we have to click on the element. So the return type of find element is WebElement. The click method is in WebElement interface. So we use the click method of WebElement interface to click on the element. Let's execute this command. Now, if you observe, this has failed. The reason of the failure is we haven't switched into the frame. So whenever we encounter a frame, unless we go into the frame, the actions on the elements are not going to happen. So let's switch into the frame. If you see here a tag called iframe, any frame will have a tag called iframe or frame. In recent times, we use iframe only. So in this iframe, you see something called name and the name as callout. So we will use this to identify our frame. Let's write that down. And this time, if we execute the code, we will be able to see that the no thanks is clicked, which means our code has passed. If we go back, we see process finished with exit code 0. After we have done that, we can add a wait of 2 seconds for the application to sync in with our code execution. Now, let's say we want to search for Selenium dev in the text area. So for that, again, we have to identify the element first. So once the no thanks is clicked on, we go back here, inspect, and let's say we want to use ID this time. So I'll copy this out, go in this place and write ID. To identify it as an ID, we have to use a hash. If I press enter, I see 1 of 1 again and the text area gets highlighted. So let me use this in my code. I will need to move back to the parent frame. For that, again, I will be using another command called driver.switch to .parent frame. Once I have switched to the parent frame, I have to now search for the element. So I will use the driver.find element. I'll write by.id this time, and I will provide the value. We wanted to send keys. We wanted to type values in here. So we use dot send keys, and inside that, we send in the value. Let's say selenium.dev. Once I have done that, let's say I want to wait again for another 2 seconds. And post this, I want to click on Google search. Again, to click on Google search, we have to identify the element. So let me write selenium.dev. And if you observe, there is a Google search button over here. Do a right click and inspect. So let's use the class name this time. We have a class name. To identify the class name in HTML, we use a dot class name. If I press enter, I get 1 of 2, which means there are 2 elements which has the same class. In this kind of scenario, whichever element is at the top gets the precedence in Selenium. So if you see, the object that we wanted to click is on the top. We will use this to identify the Google search. Again, same statements, this time class name, and inside class name, we will give the value. Once we have identified the element and use the click method, let's run this code. All right, the next step passed as well. Let's now click on the link which says more results from Selenium dev. Let's do it using parcel link text. Let's go into the inspect section. So parcel link text is only applicable for elements which has a tag A. A stands for anchor element. It is used for all the links. Whenever we want to use parcel link text or link text, it has to be for a link. We now know that we can use a parcel link text for this element because it has the tag A. The content of the tag is the text we are looking out for. In parcel link text, we do not need to mention the whole text. We will be mentioning only part of the text. Let's say in this case, we want to mention more results from Selenium. Let's see if that is unique. Perfect. I can see one of one. Before clicking on the link, let's use a sleep for another 2 seconds. And then the same commands, driver.find element. Inside that, we have to use by.parcel link text this time. We have passed on the copied text as well. So here we want to click on this element. Once we have done this, we expect our code to click on the element, which would take us to the next page. So manually, let's perform the step. In this page, I see something called About Selenium. Let's say we want to click on this using link text. Again, it starts with A. So yes, I can use link text for this element. I have copied the text. Let me search for it. It says one of three, which means it has three elements with the same text about Selenium. But the option that we are looking for is the first element. And I want to click on it. We can use a wait of 2 seconds before clicking on the element. Let's execute the code till here. Perfect. We were able to execute our code still here. Next step, we want to get into the blog. To do that, we want to use CSS locator this time. So let me inspect it. For CSS, we can use tag and attribute details to identify an element. We cannot use the text, the content in CSS. Like in XPath, there are two ways of identifying an XPath, absolute and relative. There is no such thing in CSS. But CSS is faster than XPath. If we can identify an element using CSS, we should prefer doing that when compared with XPath. So to go into blog, the CSS would look something like A as the tag name, dot for the class, nav link as the value of the class, and let's say we want to add the attribute detail of href. So within square bracket, we will write href equal to perfect. It matches what we were expecting. So let's use this in our code. Once we have identified the element, let's click on it and execute the code. Perfect. It was able to click on the blog. So out of the locators that we have used till now, the fastest is ID and the slowest is XPath. If we have an ID, we should always go for an ID. XPath should always be the last resort, where if we are not able to use any of the other locators to identify an element uniquely, we would be using XPath. Now, this is all about find element. Uniquely identifies one element at a time. If we use find elements, we will be able to identify a lot of elements at once, which will be having a return type of list of web element. So let's use one statement to get all the links in the page. We are now at the blog. In the blog, let's identify all the links present. The task here is to identify all the links. Here, the statement would be driver dot find elements. We use the locator. This time, because we are trying to identify all the links, we will use by tag name. And the tag name used to identify all the links is A. The return type of this statement is list of web element. So let's create a variable Now this list would contain all the web element which is linked. There is another method called getAttribute, which would be giving us all the details of the attribute of an element. So we will use that method to find out the value of HREF present for these links. How do we do that? Because this is a list, we have to iterate. Inside the for loop, let's print all the values. And we wanted the value of HREF. Hyperreference, all the link values. Now, if we execute this code, by now we would have got all the values listed in our console. Let's go there and check. Perfect. If you see here, there are so many links which were present in the HREF, which is listed. So a quick summary of what we learned today. We can use find element to find out one unique element. If there are multiple matching values for the locators that we have used, it will always pick the topmost one in the page. We can use find elements to find out a list of web element. This is all about static elements and how to identify them. Thank you for watching. That's all for today. Please do not forget to like, subscribe, and share. See you soon. Happy coding.